An open meeting. Right there around the door as you come in is the actual Open Meeting Act. If you would you please join us in a moment of silence in the Pledge of Allegiance, and please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And we'll continue with roll call.
Coy,
Here.
Langy,
Here.
Merrill,
Here.
Clausen,
Here.
Murin,
Here.
Moaning,
Here.
Faust,
Here.
File.
Here.
All right. And I would ask for approval of the consent agenda.
So move, Your Honor. Second.
A motion with a second to approve the consent agenda as provided you. Please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative.
And as well, approval of the full agenda.
Make the motion, Your Honor.
All right, a motion with a second to approve the full agenda as included in your packet. Again, please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative.
Okay. We have a few special presentations tonight. I will start first with the proclamation as No Text on Board Pledge Day. Whereas Norfolk holds the health and safety of its young adults as chief concern, and whereas text messaging is the main mode of communication for most American teenagers, with half of all teens sending between 21 and 70 text messages a day, and whereas 90% of American teenagers expect a reply to a text message within 5 minutes, and whereas texting takes one's eyes off the road for an average of 5 seconds, and whereas in an AT&T survey, 43% of American teenage drivers admitted to texting while driving, even though 97% know that it is dangerous. And whereas a Virginia Tech study showed that those who send text messages while driving are 23 times more likely to crash. And whereas a driver that sends a text message while driving not only jeopardizes his or her safety, but also the safety of passengers, pedestrians, and other drivers. And whereas AT&T It Can Wait public awareness campaign to end texting and driving has been endorsed and supported by Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile USA Incorporated, and more than 200 other organizations. And whereas the Texting and Driving It Can Wait program can literally save lives throughout Norfolk, Nebraska. So now therefore be it resolved that I, Sue Fookman, Mayor of the City of Norfolk, Nebraska, do hereby proclaim September 19th, 2013 as No Text on Board Pledge Day. Is there anyone here, Beth? Okay. And next is the Assisted Living Week proclamation. Whereas the number of elderly and disabled Americans is dramatically increasing, and whereas assisted living is a long-term care service that fosters independence and autonomy in our elderly community wide, and whereas the National Center for Assisted Living and the Madison House proudly sponsor Assisted Living Week 2013, and whereas the theme of Assisted Living Week 2013 is Homemade Happiness. Therefore, I, Sue Fookman, Mayor of the City of Norfolk, do hereby proclaim the week of September 8th through the 16th, 2013 as Assisted Living Week in Norfolk and the surrounding area, and I call upon all citizens to visit friends and loved ones who reside at these facilities, and also to learn more about assisted living services and how they benefit our seniors. Again, I don't believe we have, yep, I think I actually delivered that one in, okay. And the last one we have is Family Day, a proclamation, a day to eat dinner with your children. Whereas the use of illegal and prescription drugs and the abuse of alcohol and nicotine constitute the greatest threats to the well-being of America's children, and whereas frequent family dining is associated with lower rates of teen smoking, drinking, illegal drug use, and prescription drugs, and whereas parents who engage in their children's lives through such activities as frequent family dinners are less likely to have children who abuse substances, And whereas family dinners have long constituted a substantial pillar of family life in America, now therefore, I, Sue Flickman, Mayor of the City of Norfolk, Nebraska, by the power vested in me, do hereby proclaim September 23rd, 2013, as Family Day, a day to eat dinner with your children in the City of Norfolk, and I encourage all citizens recognize and please participate in the observance. Okay. And with that, we're going to ask for a street project update. Mark?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Just here to kind of give you a brief status update on our various street projects around town. First one, as we're all aware of, is Michigan Avenue. Making a lot of progress out there. I know sometimes it doesn't appear to be so. We're finishing up the underground items. Basically, the items we have left are we're doing some inlets on the north end of Michigan Avenue on 11th. There's a couple inlets there we got to do, and a couple inlets around 10th and Michigan that we're finishing them up. Got to remove some old storm sewer there, but that's basically the gist of the underground work we have left. If you noticed last week, they started hauling in rock from the west end all the way up to 12th, and then the rest of this week they're going to try to continue removing the bad subsoil and hauling in more rock to get a good sub base for our pavement. So that's the gist of Michigan Avenue. You know, we're, if you read the paper, we're a few weeks behind schedule, mainly due to the weekly rains we seem to have about every Thursday for a good month. So it puts us about 3 or 4 weeks behind schedule. So hopefully looking to get done sometime in November on that project. That would be with all your driveways and sidewalks and everything. So, but the main line, we should be starting on that here in probably 2 to 3 weeks. Is kind of, when I was talking to the contractor today, he was thinking maybe 2 weeks to start on the paving. So.
Okay.
So that's Michigan Avenue.
Any questions for him at all on that one?
Any questions on Michigan Avenue right now?
I guess, are you planning on, I mean, is the street going to be open and then we'll complete the sidewalks, streets and driveways, and then open the street and then do the sidewalks?
Basically, what we committed to the property owners is that we would, so most of the sidewalks torn out, but they're between Southern and 11th on the south side. They have a tough time having access there, so we committed to keeping that sidewalk in place until they can at least park on the street. And then once they can park on the street, then we'll remove that sidewalk and do their sidewalks at that time, so they don't have to walk very far. But once we get the pavement done, then you know they'll slowly follow up behind them doing driveways and sidewalks as they go from west to east with the pavement. So it'll be kind of done simultaneously, just a step behind the pavement.
Thanks.
Any other questions at all?
Okay. 2 other projects we're working on. One is 20th Street, which we just started on this morning. Basically, we're doing a remove and replace from about north of Culver's to the drainage way, which you can see there on the map. Started on there. The phase 1 is that red block that I blocked out on that map there for your reference. Doing a remove and replace all the way up north and some storm sewer, but not near as intense of a project as Michigan Avenue. So that one should go, you know, a lot more quickly. We are phasing this one a little bit more because we have more businesses and a lot more access points to be able to phase it. The other one would be 18th Street, which is in conjunction with Sunset Avenue, and this is more of a panel replacement, so it's just street replacement with some subgrade. So that one should be moving along there. The reason I wanted to put this map in front of you is because right now we have 2 projects going on at once in the same area. Right now we're on phase 1 of 20th Street and doing the panel replacement south of the roundabout of 18th. And I just wanted to give you a picture of how, you know, if I'm sure there's a lot of concern out there on how are we supposed to get from north to south with, you know, both streets being torn up. We coordinate it such that 18th Street should be done before we continue on north. So 18th south of the roundabout should be done before we go on to phase 2 and phase 3 of 20th Street. So at this time, this is the route how folks would get, you know, from north to south in that area without, or they go over to 275 or to 13th. But we just want to put that in front of you to kind of give you an idea, because I figured that would be a question that you would have.
Okay. Any other questions or comments or concerns?
Mark, that's being published in the paper. Everybody's going to know about it.
We did publish those in the paper. We have published those. So this drawing won't be. I guess we haven't necessarily advertised that. We could, certainly put this up on our website too, and see what other avenues we can have for getting that out to the public. They should only be 2 or 3 weeks like this, and then they should be done on 18th Street. And once they're done on 18th, they're going to move over to Sunset, which is part of that project. And then Elkhorn Paving will move further north on 20th Street to do from Vicky Lane going north.
Okay, thank you.
I think that would be helpful if you could have this on the website, and then maybe as you move forward into phase 2, maybe you could kind of show phase 2, and then maybe even show the phase 3, just
Yep.
chronologically, so people could get in their
Certainly.
mind how it's gonna move.
Yep.
That'd be great. Thanks, Mark.
Yep.
Hey, Mark, on going back to Michigan Avenue, during the public input session on that, there was some concern among area residents about speed controls on that road. I know you guys are focused on what you're doing right now, but once that road opens again, has there been any more talk about some remedies to excessive speeds on that street, as far as extra signage or?
We'll put the signage back that was there. The one thing is sometimes when you put too many signs, then no one pays attention to any of the signs. We can certainly work with the police department on making sure that speed limits are enforced, on the streets where there are problems. And I think that would be our method of remedying that. Unless, Dennis, do you have any other additions to that, or?
The best thing we can do is some signage that's appropriate. Maybe put the speed trailer down there if we're seeing that, so folks kind of understand how fast they're going. Selective enforcement, some of those things. So really don't have anything too much. I was at an APWA conference in Chicago last week, and one of the speakers was talking about speeds and things, and he says sometimes the answer isn't what you really think it is, and he was talking about a couple instances where they had speed limits at 25 and they raised them to 30, and the actual overall speed decreased. Had a couple examples of that. So sometimes people just think that's what they're going to drive, and don't pay attention to the signs, and when you give them a faster sign, they drop, the speeds drop. So kind of counterintuitive. So.
Okay. Thanks, Dennis. Anything else at all, council? Okay. Mark, we appreciate it. I think it's a great idea that you come forth, and when we got projects like this going on, it sure helps us to be able, as elected officials, to give some answers to if we don't have, the citizens that are seeing it in the paper or listening tonight. So, again, appreciate having you here.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, then we're going to move on to public hearings. Tonight, we're going to talk about the budget. So we're going to open a public hearing to, first of all, review the City of Norfolk's fiscal year 2013-2014 municipal budget as well. Public hearing will be to review the City of Norfolk's 2013-14 proprietary budget, which is the water, sewer, and solid waste. And also public hearing to receive comments regarding changing the vehicle parking fund tax request for the 2013-14 fiscal year from the amount for the 2012-13 fiscal year. I understand, Shane, you're going to do the introduction, and then...
You bet,
Okay.
Mayor, I will. Mayor and council, as Randy takes you through the budget document, summary of the budget document this evening, you're going to see, I think, as you already have seen, in fact, that the staff, with your guidance, has put together a conservative and a budget here this year, but yet responsive to the community's needs and to the goals that you've set for the community. We have some plans in place to meet those goals. In due time, some of those will occur over the course of this budget, and some are longer lasting goals. But it's a good budget. A lot of hard work went into it. It does meet the needs of the community from the staff's perspective as well. So our department and division heads, I'm proud of them. They've done a good job, and by all intents have met your desires in the budget from my viewpoint. So That being said, Randy, if you could take us through the summary of the budget,
Yes,
and
I'd be
we'll
glad
be
to
happy
do
to
that.
answer your questions.
You see, I got on the cover of the budget, the Supertel building, or the former Supertel building, which is the building we're sitting in now. This is actually the first budget hearing we've had in this fine council chambers. This was a goal of the mayor and council for the fiscal year ended September 30, 2011. We closed on the purchase of this building the last day of that fiscal year on September 30, 2011. So we took it very seriously, and we got that done by the hair of our chinny chin chin. And then we had some remodeling that we did on the facility, and we moved into it the following spring. And subsequently, we remodeled this big open space you see here into the council chambers we're sitting in now. And it's been a tremendous improvement to our efficiency and functionality. It's great not having to run all over town every time you want to have a meeting. Able to bring people into your office and have a good spot to have a meeting. And we got all that done for about $2 million. So I think that was a tremendous improvement, and I'm enjoying being able to have our first budget hearing here in this new facility. When you look at our budget for this year, this is a comparison of the capital budget to the total budget with the current year, the 13-14 year, the top bars on here, and the red bars are the capital budget. You can see that we ramped up our capital outlay tremendously in 10, 11, and 11, 12 fiscal years, and that's primarily related to the recreation facilities. We had a $16.4 million rec facility bond issue in December of 2010 that was approved by the voters, and that was the ramping up of capital outlay to get that done, and that was primarily done in these 2 fiscal years here. That put our capital outlay back down this $19.5 million range, and that's almost exactly what we're budgeting again this year is $19.5 million. So very little change in overall capital outlay between the 2 years. Over half of that $19.5 million is budgeted in the city's 3 enterprise funds. A lot of that is a rebudgeting of capital that didn't get done in the prior years. The largest of those projects is a $3.6 million water transmission main from wastewater treatment plant into town. And we also have a large sewer main budgeted, the Southwest Interceptor, for $1.7 million. Those 2 large main projects comprise over half the utility capital outlay. As you can see, our total budget this year went up a little bit, about 5.5%. Primarily due to a $3 million increase we have in fund balance. Water fund ending balance increases over $1 million as use fees are accumulated to pay for future capital outlay. The CIP has over $3 million of water capital outlay over the next 4 years. Debt service fund ending balance also increases over $800,000, and that's due to the occupation tax we're accumulating to pay those rec bonds I mentioned earlier. Those bonds are not callable until December of 2015, so that money is set aside in the debt service fund. We're making our normal annual bond payments out of those, and then when December 2015 gets here, those monies that we've accumulated from the occupation tax will be available to call and pay those rec bonds early. Not all of them, but a substantial portion of them. And then CHAF ending balance, City Highway Allocation Fund ending balance increases almost $700,000 as we accumulate highway allocation funds for future capital outlay. And we've got a lot of future capital outlay budgeted, and the street improvement program has almost $9 million of street projects budgeted in the next 4 years. Here's the history of our property tax. That seems to be what people are most interested in, what's going to happen to my property tax. As you can see, we've kept that level for the last 5 years, basically, except for this $400,000 voted Economic Development Fund, OB 840 capital outlet, or property tax of $400,000. The vehicle parking district changes every year because they're just in the downtown business district, and they try to budget their maximum 35 cents allowed by law each year. So as their assessed values go up and down, their property tax goes up and down. Our property tax, this is based on the 2012 tax rates. I think we'll continue to be the fourth lowest of all the first-class cities. We'll stay right at the 23-cent property tax rate. We had a slight increase, about 1% in assessed valuation, so we'll have a slight decrease in our levy rate. You probably won't hardly notice that on your tax bill. If you got a hypothetical, typical $100,000 home we talk about, you'll see maybe a couple buck decrease in the city's portion of that tax bill. But once again, I expect we'll be substantially under most other first-class cities. Unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you want to look at it, our piece of the total property tax pie is that little blue piece of the chart there, which is about 11% of the total property tax budget. So the impact of what we do on a person's overall property tax bill in Norfolk is relatively small. The school district makes up the biggest portion of that by far, almost 60%. And Madison County is about double what ours is, and everybody else put together is about what ours is. So what we do with our property tax may not follow through on what happens to the property tax bill for the citizens on their home, depending on what the other taxing entities do with their levy rates. When you look at general fund revenues, that property tax slice of the pie is that blue slice there. It's our third largest general fund revenue source, but it's relatively small, less than 8% of our general fund revenues. Sales tax is by far the largest general fund revenue source. Over 40% of our general fund revenues are sales tax. So sales tax is moving along, going up nicely. We usually have a relatively easy time putting our budget together. Conversely, if that isn't going up, it's very difficult to put our budget together. The second largest source is that green piece of the pie, which is about a quarter of the pie down in the left-hand corner. And that's NPPD lease revenues, and everything else, all the other revenue sources other than sales tax, NPPD lease revenue, and property tax also makes up about a quarter of the property tax pie. Sales tax has been relatively flat since about 2000. This is a chart showing what's happened in the last 5 years with our sales tax. As you can see, most years it's a month-by-month chart with the most recent years on the right side. Last year, the 11-12 fiscal year, which is the kind of purple-colored charts, Mark Dolachek probably appreciates that, being a K-State man. That was a great year for us, and that's not necessarily why I put it in purple, but it was a great year for us. It reminded me of the good old days. We had about an 8% increase in our sales tax in that year. And that's what we used to average prior to 2000, was about an 8% increase in sales tax. This year's been somewhat mixed. If it wasn't for this little tiny bar you see in May, we'd have had about a 2% increase in sales tax this year. As good as the 8%, but when you put it on top of that 8%, definitely a pretty good trend in our sales tax. Unfortunately, there was a big $544,000 tax refund taken off of our May sales tax check, and that's why that May bar is so small. That was related to Tyson Foods. They had paid use tax in error from January 1999 through December 2005. And of course, you would think that's way past any time when they could request a refund of that tax. But the Department of Revenue had an audit going clear back to 1993. And since then, they had a series of 25 extensions of the statute of limitations. So that all of those periods were still open, including the January 1999 to December 2005 period. And that's why they were able to request and get that refund going way back past when you would expect they would be able to get that refund. If there's any sunny side to that, I guess you could say it happened when, in general, our sales tax was pretty good. And so we were able to absorb that without taking any major hits. If that would have happened on some of those years when we had sales tax declining or no growth like we had for a number of years, it would have been much, much more difficult. So the amount of refund that Tyson got was almost exactly the increase we had in sales tax prior year, in that $540,000 range. Completely a coincidence, but that pretty much offset that really good year in those purple bars I was talking about. I don't anticipate that happening again. That was a real one-off thing. So when we put together our budget for the next year, we based it on the last 12 months' receipts without taking into account that refund. And that results in our sales tax budget increasing $332,000 over the prior year, or about 4.5%. And that's strictly based on the receipts from August 2012 through July 2013, absent the Tyson refund. The next largest revenue source we have in the general fund is the MPPD lease revenue. This is a chart going back 10 years showing how that's been trending. You'll see in the earlier part of that, this was relatively flat except for this period right in here, and that was the power partnership that bumped that up. You remember we had been giving 2% of our 12% lease payment back to customers as a credit on their utility bills. Back in that 2005 timeframe, we kept that, took that, and then distributed it back to the 4 power partnership entities, and that's why that bumped up. Other than that, it was relatively flat in the early years. And then MPPD started having a series of rate increases, and you can see they had that's what was driving these increases we had in lease revenue the latter years. Those began about 2008, with the most recent being a 3.75% increase January 1 of 13. Our budget contemplates that there'll be a 2% rate increase January 1 of 2014, with a result of a 2.87% increase in budgeted MPPD lease revenue for next year. The expenditure highlights are on this slide. You can see total city budget's about $73 million. The 2 big pieces of that are almost exactly the same for these last several years, in that $19.5 million range for personnel and capital outlay. Personnel cost increased 1.86%. We have a 1.5% cost of living adjustment in this year's budget based on the last 12 months increase in the consumer price index at the time we started putting the budget together, rounded down to the nearest 1/10%. Also impacting that are the normal merit pay increases. We have a group health insurance premiums increasing 3%. And this year there's LB 1082, which was passed a session ago in the Nebraska legislature, has a requirement that the first-class city police pension contributions, both employee and employer, go up from 6 to 6.5%. That's in this budget, and the ordinance implementing that's considered later on in the agenda packet. Also in the agenda packet is an increase in pension for the general employees plan of the same 0.5%, which would make the city's maximum match go from 6 to 6.5%. That's not required by statutes, but our personnel rules say that we try to keep benefits comparable to the extent we can within state law between the employee groups, and we would like to have the council increase the general employees plan similar to the police plan and go from 6 to 6.5%. Fire plan is dictated by statutes also. They already have a 6.5% that they contribute to the plan with a double match, or 13% that the city's putting in, but they are not covered by Social Security. So when you take that into account, it's roughly comparable to what the city's putting in with Social Security and pension after this 6.5% increase. We're still about, I believe, 0.3% behind, but relatively comparable. And with statutes, we cannot change what's going into the fire plan, and they are still ahead of the police and general employees. And then there were several changes in budgeted personnel, resulting in a slight decrease in full-time equivalents, actually 0.19 full-time equivalent decrease. We added an economic development property coordinator, and I believe she'll be starting here shortly. We moved the auditorium budget into the park budget this year. With our move out of the auditorium and over into this building, their expenditures were getting to be so low that it just really didn't make any sense to have them as a separate budget anymore. And we had budgeted in there a couple vacant part-time positions totaling 1.3 full-time equivalents. Those are gone. In recreation, the aquatics manager position was retitled to facilities manager and increased to a full-time position, adding a third of a full-time equivalent. And library assistant positions changed, resulting in a 0.28 increase in full-time equivalents. And in the SNARE, Specialized Narcotics Abuse Reduction Effort Fund, they had a part-time clerk receptionist. They have reduced funding this year, so they are reducing her hours, and that results in a 0.37% decrease in full-time equivalents. If you add all those up, you get a 0.19 decrease in full-time equivalent positions. O&M goes up about $463,000 or 4.24% this year. The LB 840 fund's a big part of that increase. It actually went up $673,000. We're budgeting that we're going to spend all the available LB 840 money, but we've only had one grant or loan go out the door, which was Premier Senior Marketing for $155,000. So as those funds accumulate and we're budgeting to spend them, that causes that fund to go up. Fire O&M also increases about $130,000. The biggest chunk of that is $75,000 budgeted for a comp plan update this year. We haven't updated that for a number of years, and that's overdue. And partially offsetting these increases is a $503,000 reduction in Water Division operation and maintenance. They budgeted $625,000 last year to paint the large water tanks, and $60,000 is rebudgeted this year is all. Capital outlay, as I mentioned, is roughly equivalent year to year. Over half of that being the three enterprise funds. Some of the large non-utility capital outlay is in the CHAF fund. They've got $832,000 for the Northeast Industrial Highway project from Highway 81 to First Street, $800,000 for street maintenance contract work, $395,000 for rehabilitation of the bridge over the North Fork of the river on Norfolk Avenue by Hy-Vee, and $302,000 for the city's share of the Department of Roads project at Highway 35 and Victory Road. The Capital Projects Fund has a lot of large capital items in it, as you would expect. There's $400,000 in there for new financial software. The contract for that was just awarded at a recent council meeting. I don't think it'll be that much, but in addition to software, there'll be some hardware upgrades needed. I think it'll be substantially less than that, but we've had that amount in the budget for several years, and that carries forward. There's $410,000 for a new equipment storage building at the street division. $416,000 is the expenditure of the last recreation bond proceeds. It's budgeted this year. That includes some retainages at the Memorial Park portion, along with work at Tazuka on the ball fields. And then there's, in addition to that, $220,000 of council priority money budgeted to complete work on those ball fields at Tazuka. And we have also $206,000 for the Tazuka Trail extension, which is coming from Keno in the Capital Projects Fund budget this year. And we have $220,000 of Keno money budgeted what's called the Trail at Skyview in the budget. I understand that's really more of a placeholder, and the council may choose to reallocate that to some other trail projects later on. But right now, there's $220,000 in there that's labeled Skyview. There's $234,000, excuse me, for a rural pumper in the budget. We'll buy it, and the rural fire district will reimburse us for that. There's $425,000 in the budget for another fire pumper, which will be paid for with public safety tax anticipation bonds. And public safety tax anticipation bonds will also be used for an HVAC upgrade, well, a replacement, I understand, at the police station for $489,000. And the remaining council priority money of $498,000 that we haven't allocated yet is in the capital projects fund budget and just designated as unspecified council priority money. So if you decide what you want to do with that money this year, it's in the budget simply as unspecified council priority projects. Debt service goes down about $112,000 or 3.4%. Half of that, or better than half of that, is in the solid waste fund. We had a 1990 bond issue that I didn't actually go back and count, but I think it ended up getting refunded 3 or 4 times. And a portion of the 2011 refunding bonds related to that 1990 bond issue paid off, and that's what resulted in that large decrease in debt service in the solid waste fund. Transfers are down $139,000, primarily because of up $139,000, primarily because of a $172,000 increase in transfers from the general fund to the capital projects fund. And the biggest reason for that increase is transfers of Keno money to the capital projects fund. We had about an $80,000 bump in Keno revenue this 12-13 year, which is also the same amount that we're budgeting in 13-14. So we got two $80,000 bumps that we didn't anticipate when we put the budget together last year, and that $160-some thousand will be transferred in the 13-14 year. So that's what's making up that large increase in the transfer from the general fund to the capital projects fund. We're also budgeting a $50,000 transfer of council priority money from the general fund to the economic development operating fund this year, and that will be matched by the county. So we'll have, each of us will be putting $150,000 into the economic development operating fund next year. And partially offsetting those increases was decreased transfers out of the 911 fund and wireless 911 fund. And finally, ending fund balance goes up about $3 million or 21.4%, as I discussed earlier. The funds that comprise our budget, there's 5 relatively large funds that comprise 75% of the budget, and then there's 17 other funds that comprise the remaining 1/4 or quarter of the budget. I'm going to focus the rest of this presentation on these larger funds, and I'll try and get through that relatively quickly. The general fund is by far the largest fund in the city. $23 million is the general fund budget, and that's almost 1/3 of our entire budget. And general fund revenues are projected to increase $813,000 or about 4.5% this year. The largest increase is in the charges for services, which is up $311,000 or almost 19%. $155,000 of that is increase in ambulance charges due to increased rates going into effect at the beginning of the new fiscal year. And pool emissions are budgeted to increase $115,000. We now have a year of actual operations at Aquaventure under our belt, and we can fairly confidently budget what we think we'll be getting in revenue from that. The next largest increase is in taxes, which go up about the same amount as charges for services, or $306,000. And $332,000 of that sales tax, as I talked about earlier. And then we've got some offsetting decreases in Cable One franchise fees and telecommunications occupation tax. The property tax portion of that, as I mentioned, is unchanged. The other significant increase is in rent and other revenue, which is up $211,000, and that's where the NPPD lease revenue gets budgeted. and $132,000 of that $211,000 increase shown here is MPPD lease revenue, with the other $80,000 being the Keno revenue increase we saw that I was talking about earlier. On the expenditure side, we've got an $847,000 increase in expenditures, or about a 4.25% increase. As you can see, the auditorium went away, which is the biggest percentage change by far that we have on this slide, and that moved up into park maintenance, which causes their 6.5 or 6.43% increase. Engineering, library, and police all increase at or below the 3.5% increase allowed in the level 3 budget. Increases above the 3.5% include in admin, the budgeted transfers I mentioned earlier from the general fund to the capital projects fund. Those are budgeted in the administration division. That's what causes our increase. In street, there's several things. There's $40,000 for illuminated street signs and $36,000 for a retaining wall where the city's storm sewer dumps into the North Fork at Park Avenue. The storm sewer maintenance is budgeted in the street division. Housing is budgeted at $25,000 increase for the community housing study. There's a slight increase above the 3.5 in recreation, and that relates to budgeting, increasing the an employee from single to family health coverage. And in fire, we have $75,000 budgeted for the comprehensive plan update. Backing up a couple slides. See, the sewer fund has almost no change in their overall budget, and as you look through their line items, they're relatively consistent with the prior year. They had a small decrease in capital outlay of about $54,000, which offset most of their increase in other categories. So their budget's pretty comparable to the prior year budget. Water funds are third largest fund. It's going up about $466,000, or almost 6%. Rates remain unchanged, and our water revenue we're budgeting unchanged. Last year, we had $2 million of revenue bonds budgeted in the water fund, and we also actually issued those bonds. No bond issues contemplated this year. There's a $2 million decrease in non-revenue receipts in the water fund, and most of that's not spent. As I indicated, most of the capital outlay carries forward, so that's bumping up our fund balance. And that's most of the $2.4 million increase in beginning fund balance. Expenditures decreased $584,000 due to that repainting of the water tanks that was budgeted last year at $625,000. And capital outlay is budgeted at about $4.5 million both years, and primarily rebudgeting the prior year capital outlay, the $3.6 million water transmission main I talked about earlier, $577,000 to replace a water main on Madison Avenue from 1st to 7th Street, and $235,000 for water main improvements at Omaha Avenue and Victory Road. Ending fund balance goes up $1 million as we accumulate use fees for future capital outlay for those large water projects I was talking about. Group insurance fund is another large fund we have. That increases $272,000 or 4.7%. That's where we budget our employee health costs. We're self-funded, and that's in the group insurance fund. It's an internal service fund. Beginning fund balance increases $192,000. We had fewer claims in 11-12 than we were estimating when we prepared the budget last year. Internal service fund billings increased $257,000 because of that 3% increase in both employee and employer premiums. And expenditures are expected to remain the same as last year. The net result of all that is a $272,000 increase in ending fund balance, from 2.8 to 3.2 million. The debt service fund increases $826,000 or 18.5%, primarily those accumulations of occupation tax to pay debt service on the rec bonds. And as I indicated, those bonds are callable December 2015. We're actually budgeting an $88,000 increase in those occupation taxes this year based on the revenues we saw this last year. And the expenditures in there are about the same as last year, very little change because we had no new bond issues that are paid for out of the debt service fund, and we didn't pay off any bond issues either. So you got about $1.9 million of expenditures both years, resulting in ending fund balance increasing $832,000 as we accumulate that occupation tax to pay off the rec bonds. That concludes my presentation, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks, Randy. Any questions?
Randy, are we currently in the third year of the rec bonds?
Those bonds were issued December of 2010, so we're in the,
In
third
December,
year.
it'll be,
Yes.
okay.
Randy, I have a question about the group insurance fund. I see that we've got a 4.74% increase. What is the significant factor in that? I mean, obviously you have to have more personnel for that to go up because it's based off of our total wages. I would imagine there's got to be some formula how you figure that, or is that just because of,
Sheila really protects that group insurance fund, and she likes to see those fund balances increasing. We didn't budget any increase in expenditures. We did budget a 3% increase on both employee and employer rates. And we've learned from past experience, if you've got a good year where your expenditures aren't going up, you're going to have a bad year where they go way up. And so we try to level that out and have somewhat stable increases. And long-term, the inflation, medical health care cost inflation index, I believe, is running around that 3% range. So even though we probably wouldn't have needed that increase this year, to try and not get behind and have no increase this year, and maybe have to have a 6 or 7 or 8% increase the next year, even if we have relatively good claims for a year, we try and keep that increase in there, so we don't get behind the curve when we know that we may have a good year this year, but you're gonna have bad years the next year. You just don't know when those big claims are gonna come. And so that's why we budgeted that increase in the group health fund, even though you may not think we need it, because when you're looking at what we're budgeting for expenditures, it really wouldn't indicate that you would need a rate increase. You should be able to keep those constant, but good years and bad years offset, and so we're trying to just keep a relative steady rate of increase in those rates.
Any other questions at all, council?
So Randy, the bottom line for some of the citizens who are listening to this, they want to know if their taxes are going up.
They are not.
They are not going up. So they can get that on the airway and say that taxes are staying level, or?
Yeah, property tax asking staying level. We had a slight bump in assessed valuation, so there'll be a slight decrease in the levy rate. In that typical $100,000 home, we're talking a couple dollar decrease in what they'd be paying the city. So yeah, essentially they're the same.
The same, thank you.
Well, it's important to note that the city's portion of their
Yes.
taxes aren't going up.
Going back to
I mean,
that pie chart,
That's what I meant. Yep,
So,
we're a tiny slice of the overall pie, so what we do
right.
doesn't have a big impact on their overall.
That's what I meant. The city's portion is staying level. That's the one I get the phone calls on, so.
Any other questions or comments?
when you were going over the sales tax revenue this year, you talked about, obviously we had to pay in that 540,000. We had an 8% gain the previous year, and then you said we were looking at a 2% gain if
We wouldn't
that
have
wouldn't have
that.
happened?
If we wouldn't have that $544,000 refund, we'd have a 2% gain this year.
So that still showed in that, your overall net revenue increase of 4.5%, that 500 was already out of there, is, you know what I'm saying, to get your final percentage points.
Yeah, the prior year's budget didn't have anything related to that 544,000, and this year's budget doesn't have anything related to that 544,000. And that we get that 4.5% increase by taking the last 12 months of receipts.
Sure.
And when we were putting the budget together in the prior year, we didn't have those big increases that came in the latter months of that year. So even though we have a 2% increase basically this year, we had some big increases at the tail end of last year that makes that come up to that 4%.
Hopefully that's a standing trend, because that'd be a 10% or 12% or 10% increase over the last couple of years, which is pretty impressive when you talk
I
about.
would be happy if we'd just keep chugging along that way.
Well, it says a lot for, the retail industry in our community right now. Hopefully that's a trend where we see more people shopping here and buying their goods here locally, so, good deal.
Before we move on, Randy, do you want to address a little bit the vehicle parking fund, which I did open in this public hearing too?
Yes. Statutes require that whenever you change the tax asking from one year to the next, even if it's going down, which is what's happening in the vehicle parking fund in this case, that you have a special hearing on changing the tax asking from the amount of the amount you had in the prior year. You actually have to publish a special notice of that saying, here's what our tax rate's gonna be. In the vehicle parking fund's case, it's 35 cents. Here's what it was last year, which was 35 cents. But here's what it would have been if we'd kept our tax asking the same, which in the case of the vehicle parking district would have been a little bit more than 35 cents, but state law won't let them have that. So this seems like kind of a silly one that you have to have, but it's required by statutes. And if we would have changed our tax asking in the general fund or debt service fund, even if we'd have had that tax asking go down, I'm not coming across. I'll scoot in a little closer. So even if we'd had our tax asking go down, we'd still had to have that same hearing as we're having for the vehicle parking fund.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Are we ready to move on then and close this public hearing? And first of all, we'll look for consideration of ordinance number 5264, approving FY 2013-14 appropriations and approving fiscal year 2013-14 proprietary budget.
Your Honor, I would introduce ordinance number 5264.
Second?
Okay, a motion with a second. Any discussion on this one item here, one ordinance? If not, Beth, I'll look to you for a short title.
An ordinance of the City of Norfolk, Nebraska adopting the budget statement to be termed the annual appropriation bill, appropriating sums for necessary expenses and liabilities, adopting the proprietary budget statement, providing for severability, providing when this ordinance shall be in full force and effect, and providing for publication of this ordinance in pamphlet form.
Okay, and with that, please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5264 carries on first reading.
Your Honor, I would move that we suspend the rules and pass 5264 on second and third.
Second that?
Okay, we have a motion with a second to suspend the rules and pass on second and third. Any further discussion on that? If not, please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5264 carries on second and third.
Next, we're going to move on to, let's see, resolution number 2013-31, approving the additional 1% increase in restricted fund authority allowed upon the affirmative vote, at least 75% of this council. I need a motion to adopt.
Your Honor, I'd propose consideration of resolution number 2013-31.
Second.
Any discussion on this at all? If not, please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, resolution 2013-31 is adopted.
Okay, and now we'll go back to the public hearing to receive, whoops, I'm sorry. Let's jump to consideration of resolution 2013-32, approving the property tax request for fiscal year 2013-2014 for vehicle parking fund in an amount different than the fiscal year 2012-13.
Your Honor, I'd move consideration of ordinance 2013-32.
Second?
Okay, Resolution 2013-32, would move with a second. Any discussion on this? If not, again, please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, Resolution 2013-32 is adopted.
Okay. And under regular agenda, consideration of ordinance number 5265, approving the fiscal year 2013-14 classification and pay plan. Randy, are you going to add to this at all, or are we?
I don't really have a whole lot
okay.
to,
I'll make the
Yep,
motion.
thanks, Dale. Okay.
Second.
We have a motion with a second. And now, Randy, I'll look to you. Nothing more are you saying other than,
that's just
Pretty
approves
much
the
what's-
pay plan that's incorporated into the budget you just approved.
okay, very good. Any further discussion or questions on that at all? Then Beth will look for a short title.
An ordinance of the City of Norfolk, Nebraska, classifying the employees of the city, fixing the ranges of compensation of such employees, providing a pay range, repealing ordinance number 5225, providing for publication in pamphlet form, and when this ordinance shall take effect.
Okay, and with that, please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5265 carries on first reading.
Your Honor, I'd propose we suspend the rules and pass ordinance number 5265 on second and third.
Second that, Your Honor.
A motion with a second to suspend the rules and pass on second and third reading. No further discussion. Please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5265 carries on second and third.
And next is consideration of ordinance number 5266, approving amendment number 2 to the police pension plan to increase required employee and employer contributions from 6% of salary to 6.5% of salary, effective October 1, 2013.
Your Honor, I move consideration of ordinance 5266.
Second.
We have a motion with a second to approve ordinance number 5266. Any discussion? If not, short title.
An ordinance of the City of Norfolk, Nebraska to amend the police pension plan to incorporate LB 1082, increasing employee and employer contributions from 6% to 6.5% of compensation by adoption of the attached amendment number 1, providing when this ordinance shall be in full force and effect, and providing for publication of this ordinance in pamphlet form.
All right, please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5266 carries on first reading.
Your Honor, I would move that we suspend the rules and pass ordinance 5266 on second and third reading.
Second?
A motion with a second to suspend the rules and pass ordinance number 5266 on second and third. If no further discussion, please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5266 carries on second and third.
And we'll move to consideration of ordinance number 5267, approving amendment number 2 to the employee retirement plan, increasing the maximum city match of employee contributions from 6% of compensation to 6.5%, and reducing the age at which in-service distributions are allowed from 62 to 59.5 years.
Your Honor, I will introduce ordinance number 5267.
Second that, Your Honor.
All right, we have a motion with a second to approve ordinance number 5267. Again, if no further discussion, I'll ask for short title, Beth.
An ordinance of the City of Norfolk, Nebraska to amend the employee's retirement plan to increase the maximum city match from 6% to 6.5% of compensation, and to reduce the age at which in-service distributions are allowed from 62 to 59.5 years by adoption of the attached amendment number 1, providing when this ordinance shall be in full force and effect, and providing for publication of this ordinance in pamphlet form.
Please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, ordinance 5267 carries on first reading.
Your Honor, I would move we suspend the rules and pass ordinance number 5260 on second and third.
Second.
We have a motion with a second to suspend the rules and pass ordinance number 5267 on second and third. If no further discussion, please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative. Ordinance 5267 carries on second and third.
All right, and next would be consideration of resolution number 2013-33, extending an interlocal agreement with the League Association of Risk Management.
Your Honor, I'd propose resolution of 2013-33.
Do I have a second?
Second that, Your Honor.
Okay, we have a motion with a second to resolution number 2013-33. Any discussion on this?
Your Honor, we discussed, I think it was last year or 2 years ago when we were going to do this, that we were going to look at it for 2 or 3 years. How far does this extend us out?
The discussion was focused on 3 to 10 years, if you recall, and we were following through with what the mayor and council advised the staff to do. If you remember, our local folks, one in particular that also bid on it, said, geez, I really don't think the city should consider doing that again in a short time frame. So we're following through with that. This will extend it to 4 years, to answer your question, Councilman. But it also lets us take advantage of all the rebates and incentive packages that go along with this extension. So this will get us to 4 years. So I don't know
So
what
we're-
the magic number is, and that's direction we're gonna have to take for the council if you want it 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
So we're already on our first year.
Yes,
Now it extends it out 4 years, so actually
so a
from the.
total of 4.
Total of 4, okay.
Yeah.
Have we had any indication what they're doing this next year yet? I mean, haven't they given you your figures?
Yeah, we know what our premiums are going to be for the 13-14 fiscal year.
And how does that look?
They're up about 4.5% from the 12-13 year. And I believe we'd still be way under with that. If that would have been what we had bid last year, we'd still be way under the next low bid for insurance last year. So
Okay.
I think those are fairly reasonable increases. We're seeing, Alarm's seeing increases in the reinsurance rates and that type of thing. So there is some upward pressure in the insurance market, at least what we're seeing in the reinsurance rates.
I just don't want to get too far out to where when we talked in the subcommittee, we stay in too long, they're going to get their money one way or the other. I don't want to see it jump 12% and get it all back. So we still have an option to get out of that if we see it take off, right?
Yeah, we can get out of it, you know, we just have to, we can get out of it, I mean, you can get out of it if you give notice and you extend it, but this decision will extend it to that 4th year, so just to be clear, you're extending and making that commitment to LARM, so they can plan and like any insurance company would want to do, or any contract would want to do, so I guess I'm not sure if I understand.
Well, yeah, we're just going to guard ourselves so that next year doesn't go up 12 and 12 and 20, and then we're
If
stuck.
we're seeing all these large, super large increases
Yeah.
that we think, well, obviously, that's one thing nice about LARM is we have a voice on the board, Randy is on the board. So if you're seeing those kind of increases and there's no plausible explanation for those, of course, we're going to ask those questions to the LARM directly and to the LARM board, and those can be discussed and handled at that level. The same thing, again, can happen with any private insurance carrier too, and you don't have any direct ability to control it other than getting out and rebidding it. So all those options are available to you, Councilman, if this council decides to do that. Is that what you're asking?
Kind of,
Sure.
yes.
Okay.
I just want to make sure we don't get extended way out there with no paddle to get back here and stop if we're seeing it get out of hand.
This basically gives you a 3-year, 4-year total, but you're bumping it at a 3-year chunk. So I mean, you're in for 3 more years, basically, which gives you the 4th year total, since this is the 1st year.
Okay, Randy, the pool still strong, and I've heard rumors of some towns pulling out. Have any of them indicated that they're bidding and looking around?
Yes, we've had some indications that some of the towns are looking around, kind of like we did last year, until they actually get their bids in and crunch the numbers. We don't know what the results of that are going to be.
Randy, you make a good point there. Obviously, you have opportunity and spend time there and know what's going on. Maybe, as you do, you could fill us in as council of, pertinent information that as we look forward to the years ahead, where, I'm
I've
sure.
noticed I've been trying to, in the Friday memo, include updates every time we have alarm board meeting as to what transpired at that meeting to keep the council up
Yeah.
to date on what's going on.
But even, even if we do it here, Randy, it gives us opportunity, I think, to have a little bit more discussion if if there are questions or whatever. And certainly every elected officials know that they can come to you and sit down and have that conversation. But it's just, sometimes it's, all of a sudden it hits us again in the face. So I just think, I appreciate the efforts you're doing there too. But again, those meetings that you're attending, just to kind of give us an update and let us maybe make comment and know what's happening. I'm sure insurance in general is becoming one of those things that you don't know what tomorrow's going to be, bring for all of us. So just kind of keep us abreast of what it is you're hearing and what it is that maybe we should be made aware of too as we go forward. I think it'd be a great idea. So, any other comments or questions on this? Let's see, we've got a motion with a second.
I do, Your Honor. Shane, the adoption of this resolution, am I right in assuming it assures the maximum rebates that we have coming to us under our agreement with LARM? So this kind of helps us maximize our
Sure. I mean,
payment of
it
this,
keeps the cost
our
low.
purchase of this, if you will.
Yes, yes, sir.
All right, thank you.
But if we don't do this, we're still gonna get our maximum rebates. If we say we wanna sit and hold, can't we come back next year and say we're gonna jump back on?
If if you don't make the agreement, then it's just like we went through last year. It's a sliding scale where you get your less and less of a
Rebate?
rebate or a credit towards it, because, you're signing up, so then LARM has some predictability in what their clientele is gonna do for 3 years, so you get maximum rebate and consideration for that. But if the mayor and council wanted to, again, notify LARM that we're going to go seek bids, you have the opportunity to do that next year, and then you begin to ratchet down that because their window of clientele basically is closing on them, so they have less and less of a
Committed dollar, right?
What's that?
A committed dollar that they're
Yes.
working with?
Yeah, sure. A committed client for 3 years. So it's just like anything else, it gives them some predictability and what they're going to be able to do for rates and for their pool, for their customers, which is,
Okay.
we're one of.
Shane, this gives you a 5% participation discount, does it not?
Yes.
And if you don't do this, if the council does not approve the resolution, then that discount goes down to,
What is it?
4%, I believe it is.
What's that?
4%, I believe.
4%. You lose 1%? Okay.
and this resolution moves your continuation date to earn that discount, moves it to 3 years from now, 4 years from when it was bid. So it really moves it from 2015 to 2016, September 30th.
Okay. Are there any other questions or?
Just one. So basically, if, for that 5% reduction, that we're looking at here in fees, what's to say next year they don't come back and say, hey, for a 5% reduction, you got to renew for another year, which puts it out? That was something we were trying to get away from, was by looking at this every 3
Sure.
years to justify that we're doing this right.
Sure, at some point, absolutely. At some point, you have to decide how long is enough. It's 4 years, this is 4, so next year will be 5, and next year will be 6, and that will happen. They'll do that very thing. I mean, and they'll, again, because they want predictability in their pool, predictability in the bill, and who their clientele is, which any business person, I would imagine, would want that if they can get it. So at some point, if you want to rebid this and you want to meet your magic point of bidding between 3 and 10 years, you're going to have to give the notification. You're going to have to forego the credits that you get, just like we did last year, and then go through the process. Absolutely.
So Randy, with all of the rebates and all of the going up and down and back and forth, where are we this year?
As far as total overall premium?
Yes.
500 and, I don't have that exact number in front of me.
So we're still in pretty good shape, because a few years ago, we were in the 800s, weren't we not?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was 700 and getting close to
Close
that.
to 800, okay.
1,000, if I remember right.
Okay. Are we ready to vote? Any more questions? Good? Then please vote.
All council members voting in the affirmative, Resolution 2013-33 is adopted.
All right. I see nothing further on the agenda. We are adjourned.